Voters in Georgia encountered major problems at the polls during Tuesday's primary. Many waited in line for hours due to a shortage of workers and issues with new voting machines. Nancy Chen has the details.
There's a lot of finger pointing the day after thousands of Georgia voters waited in long lines to cast ballots in the state's primary election.
Normally, I wait in line for like maybe an hour, maybe. This time, I've already been in line for 3 hours.
Georgia reported problems with new voting machines and a shortage of experienced poll workers due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But some blame voter suppression tactics.
I don't think it's the new machines. I do think that there is systematic disenfranchisement of specific communities.
There were also issues with absentee ballots in certain counties.
The majority of folks I heard had applied for an absentee ballot and it was never processed. And I don't really have an answer for why that happened. It's very disappointing.
Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger blames the delays on county election officials and said his office is launching an investigation.
It's just totally disorganized mess. They had 3 additional months to get ready for this. They've had those machines for 6 months now.
But critics, including Georgia's 2018 Democratic nominee for governor Stacey Abrams, say Raffensperger is to blame.
The Secretary of State is the superintendent of elections. That means it's his job to make sure that democracy works in every county. What we saw happen in Georgia was a failure of investment, a failure of training, and a failure of direction.
Georgia is expected to be a battleground state in November, and there's concern whether the problems will be fixed by then. Nancy Chen, CBS News, New York.
And Greg Bluestein joins me now for more. He's a political reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for being with us, Greg. As you heard there in the piece, predominantly black precincts reported some of the worst problems. It's led to these accusations of voter suppression, something that Georgia was also accused of during the governor's election in 2018. What's your take on all of this?
Ways, this seems like the day after the 2018 election in many senses. The 2018 election didn't solve any of the problems that we were seeing now. Officials hoped that a new voting system and other changes would have lessened the lines and made it easier for people to cast ballots. Instead, especially in predominantly black precincts, you had major issues. And I talked to voters who literally waited in line for 8 hours, who stayed in line past midnight early this morning to cast their ballots. People were bringing lawn chairs.
8 hours after midnight?
8 hours. 8 hours after midnight. Wow. One of my colleagues actually on Friday took 8 hours to vote. When people have to bring lawn chairs as an accessory to vote, you know there's a problem.
Yeah, I'd say so. So I'm wondering what steps are officials there in Georgia taking to address these issues?
Yeah. There's a number of different avenues. The Georgia legislative session starts on Monday, resumes on Monday. So there's already talk about legislation, a legislative fix, although it's not certain what avenue they could take there. There's also legal action that can be taken. Stacey Abrams' group, Fair Fight Action, she said her group is considering filing litigation, and other groups certainly are doing the same thing. And of course, the Secretary of State could implement his own changes, requiring more training, as well as allowing more mail-in ballots for the November election. He did so for this election, and we had a record number of mail-in absentee ballots. More than 1.2 million people voted early, far eclipsing any other previous total. But in Georgia, they're worried that if this resumes in November, there'll be even bigger issues. They see this as a dry run for November.
Well, a winner, Greg, as you know, in Georgia's Senate race has yet to be called in the primary race. The victor will move on to challenge Republican David Perdue in November. Can you tell us a little bit more about the people on the ballot?
Yeah, we might be getting closer to calling a victor. John Ossoff is just above the 50% mark to notch an outright win right now. He's about 50.5. Absentee ballots are streaming in. And he's winning most of them. So that's a good sign for his campaign. Although his two main rivals, Teresa Tomlinson and Sarah Riggs-Amico, they say it isn't over yet, and we should wait until all the ballots have been counted. But if he wins, he's the candidate that entered this race as the frontrunner. He was the 2017 special election nominee for Democrats who raised $30 million. So he's got a lengthy donor list, and he's someone who national Democrats, at least some national Democrats, hope can go toe-to-toe with David Perdue in November.
All right, well, let's switch gears, of course, to the presidential race. Can't let you off without asking something about November. President Trump, of course, won Georgia in 2016, receiving 50% of the vote. But I'm told that Joe Biden has been picking up some steam there in Georgia. Is it possible that Biden and Democrats could actually flip Georgia blue, or are these Democrats that I'm hearing from just really hopeful?
This sort of narrative for a while here in Georgia, but the reason why it could be different this year is that in 2018, Stacey Abrams came within about a point and a half of defeating Brian Kemp. So that was the closest a Democrat had gotten in Georgia in a long, long time. No Democrat has won Georgia in the presidential race since Bill Clinton in 1992. But Trump's margin was pretty narrow. It was about 5-point victory here. And in a series of internal Republican polls, and these, again, are polls that we at AJC obtained from Republican groups, all showed the race razor thin, basically within the margin of error between President Trump and Joe Biden. So that gives you a glimpse of how Republicans are taking this seriously. And no less than David Perdue has said that the 2018 is a wake-up call for Republicans, and they need to acknowledge that and get ready for a stiff challenge from Democrats. That's what he says.
Well, thank you very much, Greg Bluestein, and it was nice to have you on telling us all about what's happening there in Georgia.